So we're going to be talking about building web front ends, and we'll talk about desktop and mobile support. And the key thing here is using the latest web standards. So here's where we're at. So I'm going to try and finish at 11:15. We have lunch from 11:15 to 12:15 then. So we'll start with a modern web standards overview here. And so the main thing, we'll start by looking at HTML5 and kind of describing what it is. So first of all, it was kind of a thing for a while where you would see HTML5 on things the same way you would see like Web 2.0, meaning that okay, it's just HTML5, like kind of a marketing term. And the thing is that HTML5 really is a group of standards. And for instance, I'll skip ahead here just a second. So it's kind of a group of actual standards, and what we did was we took a bunch of existing things that people were doing in web browsers and kind of wrapped them all up into actual official standards. What's really nice with that is now when you develop using HTML5 standards, generally things pretty much work across browsers. So we'll take another quick look here at some stuff I skipped ahead. So first of all, browsers have become very, very powerful. You can do quite a bit in a browser now that you would not have considered doing before. Also, because of these standards, you really do kind of get to this place where if you develop correctly on standards, you can leverage that everywhere and not worry about specific browser support. So I want to show two just real quick examples. I know by now most people are not surprised to see anything on the internet now, right? But I do want to show just a few that are kind of surprising. So one, let me see, GlacierWorks is pretty neat. And the idea, this is all HTML5 and WebGL, and this is exploring Mount Everest, and it does all this kind of, it's loading images on demand, right? So you're able to go through and browse through the site, and as you zoom around, it's loading more images in. And it's loading, there it is, 99%, right? So, okay, let's go to, here, and as it zooms in, I can go in and I can start exploring. I can look at panoramas. And it actually will go in and start loading all this data in as I go, right? So you can go through and step through all this stuff. So this is pretty neat, and this is this kind of idea of this is HTML5 video, right? So this is something that in the past you would just assume was some kind of plug-in or something. Here's another one, preview photosynth is the one I want to show. Yep. So the photosynth preview is really pretty remarkable. It's another similar kind of thing. It's image-based, and the idea is, I'm able to pick an image, and I can start kind of going through it and navigating. And what this does is, as I'm exploring around, I'm able to, select a place and zoom in, and it's loading the images on the fly. And again, this is all completely. It's very responsive. Here, I'm just on the wireless network. Everything's fine. This one is really interesting. When it first came out, I went in and started actually viewing source and looking at the libraries, and this is all just JavaScript libraries in here. This is a new feature they added recently called walkthroughs, and the idea is that you can actually explore. I'm walking through. And this is done, you can do this on your phone by taking pictures and uploading it using the photosynth application. So that's pretty neat. One other one I want to show you is Hover. And this is an HTML5 game. And so this is kind of an old, the old Hover game updated to run in IE in just modern browsers. And again, this is taking advantage of of, I believe, WebGL. Probably has some sound too. Good, volume up. Standard arrows. And so, the point is, the reason I'm showing this at the beginning, again, I know nobody's surprised that you can do anything in a browser, but I just want to set our minds to thinking about web development is not just forms that you fill in and, browse and edit data. The web can do quite a bit more, right? So here's, I don't know if I can shoot. I don't even know how to play this game. I usually crash quite a bit. So that's that example. And there are a lot more. One amazing example that I saw just recently is Visual Studio Online. So this is a web application to allow you to edit your code, in a browser. So I took this picture at home on my Mac Mini, and it all works great. So here I have color, dark, and I've got autocomplete. So I mean, the idea is when you deploy a site to Azure websites, you automatically get access to this. You turn a switch and you say, I would like to edit my files online. And then let's say you're on vacation and you're not even at, you're not near your computer, and then, oh no, there's a problem on the website, right? And you can log in and you can go in and change it. So it's really pretty amazing. The point again here is that this is Visual Studio in a web browser. Now it's simplified down, but it's pretty remarkable what you can do. So I mentioned this one before. This is ECMAScript. So this is the JavaScript implementation. And of course you can't read this. But the point is a lot of stuff was all merged together here in order in this new support. So as part of working with all these new standards, here are some important things as far as how to build with those standards so you'll work in all browsers. And I think this is honestly probably one of the most important parts of this presentation. Because it's really frustrating when you browse to a site and you see this only works in WebKit, sorry, this requires Chrome, this requires IE, and the point is now browsers are powerful enough that for almost every case it should work everywhere, right? So some resources I want to give you. One is modern.ie. Modern.ie is a site built by the IE team, and the whole goal is to make it so that you can build sites that will work everywhere. So this does some great things. For instance, you can do a compatibility report. So I can, take a site. Here, let's go to the, I hope we're doing well, the ASP.NET site. And it'll scan that site, and it'll look for common problems with things like, feature detection versus browser detection. So if my code is saying, if navigator URL is IE, then do this, that's bad. We don't want to do that. Instead, we want to say, does this site support, this feature that I need? So it says here it'll take 60 to 90 seconds, and it's actually running a separate VM. Now, so there it is looking like we're making some mistakes, right? And this is actually probably some other script we're bringing in here. But so it's saying, yeah, so here an ad network is doing something that's checking for a specific browser version, right? I'll have to get that fixed. But so this is an example of something you can do very quickly to find, things that you're doing that are not cross-browser. Other examples is screenshots. So we have a screenshot service that'll work across a lot of different browsers. This is free. This is a great way for you to go in and take a look at how your site works in, here this is Windows 8, Nexus 7, OS X, iPhone 5S, right? So this is a quick way to get an idea of how your site works everywhere. One other thing that we've got on here is support for virtual machines. So, say you're working with a designer who won't ever leave their Mac. Well, here we've got virtual VHDs that they can download and that they'll run in parallels, they'll run in everything, right? VMware. And so the idea is that they can test how the site looks in IE9, in Parallels. So the whole point of this is to make it so that people really have no excuse to not support every browser. When you're looking at different standards, sometimes you want to know, can I use this feature? Can I use SVG, geolocation, etc.? So this site is called caniuse.com. And so, for example, let's say I want to see if I can use geolocation. So I'll type in geolocation, right? So this shows me that it actually has great support in all modern browsers except, potentially Opera Mini, right? So I think I'm going to be okay there. What about if I want to use, SVG? That also has some pretty good support. What about border radius? So here I can go in and start looking at, just different features. What's nice is, you'll notice most of these are pretty green, which it was not always the case. Now there still are some that we'll find, let me see if I just go back to the main page. Actually didn't expect it would be that tricky to find one that I couldn't use. Maybe font face. For instance here, okay, IE8 has different support, or doesn't have full support. And then you can go in and you can actually check out known issues on it and stuff. Right? So this is very handy for checking out different features. Maybe border. Let's leave it at that. Okay, so can I use? Compat Inspector is another one of these sites. I already showed you on the modern.ie site. Compat Inspector is something that is very easy to point at a site, and it will test again for some of those common things that you may be doing wrong. What's nice with this also is there's a Fiddler plugin. Does anyone here use Fiddler? Know about Fiddler? Okay, great. So Fiddler is a debugging agent. The debugging agent that will watch for HTTP traffic. And so if I go through and refresh this page, it sees all those requests, right? Well, you can also go in and you can configure it to automatically insert this Compat Inspector into the pages, because all this Compat Inspector uses is a script, right? So it includes that script into your pages. And then it'll go and it'll find common issues. Things like, okay, you are, here this says a cached reference to document right. Don't do that, and then you can go in and you can say verify and see, if that actually fixed the page, right? So that is Compat Inspector. So those are 3 websites that you can use to find issues with your site. Now I'm going to talk about 2 libraries that are very important, and fortunately we already ship those with ASP.NET. So I want to make sure you know how to use those. So one is Modernizer. And the idea with Modernizer is we looked at can I use, and we looked at some of these different features, right? So geolocation or SVG, etc. So you can go in there and you can say, okay, this probably will support all the browsers I need. What if you get one that only supports some of them? Well, then you need to handle a fallback, right? So you say, for instance, SVG. If this browser supports SVG, use the SVG. If it doesn't, here's an image to show instead. And what Modernizer will do is automatically detect all the features that the browser supports, and then put CSS classes in the HTML tag. So then you can write CSS that automatically falls back. You can say, if there's no SVG, hide this element, show this element, etc. Modernizer also supports a JavaScript library, so you can query and you can write code that says, using Modernizer, you can check and you can say, do I support this? Do I support that? Etc. So it's a great lightweight library. The version that is shipped with ASP.NET checks for every feature that is supported. What the Modernizer team recommends is that you actually go and create your own custom one, and that's going to perform better because instead of, so if I go Modernizer, that's going to perform better when you create your own production one because it's only going to check for the features that you're using, right? And the code for these actually is pretty complex. If you actually view the source on Modernizer, it has to do a lot of things because if a browser doesn't support a feature or partially supports it, we need to go in and check all these things. And the thing that I take away from reading that is I should not write this code, right? This is code that I need somebody who is really, really smart to write. And actually, if you look at the contributors, some of the top web developers around right now, and Paul Irish and Farouk, and some really sharp guys. And so this is something I want them to write this code. But we do ship this as part of ASP.NET, or in the ASP.NET templates. Another thing that's good to know about is CSS resets. So there are a lot of different standards out there that will say this is how you must implement geolocation. This is how you must, support form elements. So those are standards. Then there are some other things that are just kind of slightly different between browsers, and there's no standard that defines it. So an example would be the padding around a page. Should there be 10 pixels or 0 pixels or 1 pixel? There's no spec. And a lot of browsers do things slightly different. A form element might be a little bigger or might automatically have rounded corners or things like that. And so what people have done, instead of writing and testing in one browser, and then, oh no, now I have to go fix it in IE, and oh, I forgot about Firefox, and instead you want to, from the beginning, build from a common, something that looks the same everywhere. And so what resets do is they clear all that stuff out. So they'll go through and they'll say, now there's two approaches. There's reset and normalize. So let's talk about reset first. Reset wipes everything out. It goes and it says, I don't care if you're an H1 or an H4 or a paragraph, we're going to set your font size all to the same thing, right? And there are different ones, but this is in general. Resets are more focused on just make everything, clear all styles out of the site. And then you go in and build them back up. And that works, but it ends up being a lot of work because we don't need to clear everything out. We just need to fix the differences, right? So what normalize.css does is it just changes the differences. It says, okay, most things are about the same, but for instance, the size of an H1 tag, let's set that one. Let's, and so it goes through and it understands how browsers are different and it only sets a few of them. So how would you use normalize.css? Well, there is actually, you can download it. There's a site for this, and you can go in and download this, and it's just a simple CSS file. Actually, you can go in and browse. It's just CSS, right? So things like this, body margin 0. Let's just, wipe out just that. But it doesn't go through. It's not near as rough as resets are. Fortunately, normalize is included as part of Bootstrap. So if we go and look at Bootstrap, right at the top of the file, you'll see here, it's got normalize.css just included right in line, right? So you don't have to do anything here. This is just part of how Bootstrap works. The reason I'm pointing this out, though, is as you're writing your own CSS, maybe you don't want to use Bootstrap for something, you should know about normalized CSS because it'll really help you build with standards and support all browsers. Questions, thoughts on all this so far? Okay. So quickly look at one nice feature in HTML5, and that is semantic markup elements. So the idea is we used to say div class equals this, div class equals that, div, and the whole page was just a bunch of divs. And the problem is that those divs are not very easy to use, and there's no reason for it. There's no reason everyone needs to say div class equals header. So what we've got instead now is we have things like header, nav, footer, article, aside, section, some common things that you'll see in a site. And so now you can use those. Those are supported everywhere, all the way back to IE6. And the reason is the one kind of browser you'll still encounter sometimes is IE6, and it didn't know about header and nav and all that. But using JavaScript, the modernizer library goes in and says, here's some other elements that were defined long after you were built, and treat them all like they're divs. And that's all you need to do. And so now when IE sees nav, header, footer, et cetera, it's like, okay, it's like a div, and it all works. Okay? So you can use these elements everywhere. So some reasons for doing that. One, you get rid of this kind of generic, ugly markup that's harder to read. Two, the browsers actually are optimized. They can parse by a tag type faster than they can parse by CSS classes. So it's actually going to perform a little better. Another big thing that people don't think about is accessibility. So the idea is that screen readers can do a lot more for somebody that's not able to read your page. The screen reader can find the navigation if you've got nav tags, right? If you've got a header tag. And so by using those instead of your own custom markup, you're able to provide better accessibility. And accessibility, the main, of course, reason is for people, but it also exposes your site for JavaScript, search engines, etc. Anyone that's not just reading your page or code that's actually looking at your HTML can get through it a little better. And then finally, just standardizing tags. And the idea here is we can use libraries like Bootstrap and etc. that optimize around semantic tags. Right? So there are a lot of JavaScript and CSS libraries out there. And if you're using things like nav, header, footer, section, side, blah, 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 then you'll be able to take advantage of those more easily. So I think I'm going to show this. I'll show the. Actually, we're okay on time. I'll stop rushing so much. So first, let's take a look at index page. Let's take a look at the layout. Here this is an example of one that I've already built. We can see something like a footer. There's a good example there. So we've got a footer. So nothing scary, we just use a footer tag, right? Some other things I do want to show you. Let me see, we saw Bootstrap. One thing I want to show you in the Bootstrap class, remember earlier I took a widescreen browser and then I shrunk it down to a narrow screen. And the reason I did that is, the reason that works is because it's using media queries. So let's, if I search for @media, okay, here's an example. So this is a media query. What this is saying is, apply the following rule to everything with a minimum width of 768 pixels. So that means if it's smaller than 768, then it will not apply. I always have to think backwards or forward. So the idea is that media queries allow you to write the same HTML and target narrow and widescreen browsers. Here's the key point. You are never checking the user agent or trying to guess if the user is on a mobile device. All you're saying is, okay, this is a narrow screen, so let's make it look good on a narrow screen. So, and that's something that people always got wrong in, server-side detection and JavaScript detection. And it's very frustrating if you're on a, on a computer and you get a mobile view and you're like, why, or vice versa, trying to read a, widescreen and you're on a phone. And so this is very simple to do. You can just say, okay, I have different breakpoints, and so if it's a wide screen, I want to show a sidebar, and we'll throw some ads in there, etc. And if you're a narrow screen, let's simplify things down and have one column. So there's a great site that shows some examples of these, and this is Media Queries. So these are example sites showing, here's something that looks, it almost looks like a completely different site in cases, right? So if we've got a big wide screen, let's stretch out. And then if we've got a narrower screen, optimize for a mobile device, right? And one other thing to show in here is there are some media queries here that have both min and max. I thought. Well, you can definitely do that. So you can say min width and max width. So Bootstrap is very interesting because they actually, in most cases, what people used to do is they would design for a large widescreen, and then you would use media queries to hide things. And Bootstrap 3 took a different approach. They're actually mobile first. And so the idea is that by default, everything is mobile friendly, and then they use media queries to say, with a minimum width of this, add this on or change this thing. And so if we look at some of their things for this is actually, for instance, they have a grid system. In the grid system, here they define the different sizes, right? So small, medium, large, and they also have extra small. So here, if we look at some of these, you're creating a grid and you're saying, based on a certain size, expand or shrink, or change how many things are shown in a row. So let's take a look. I'll pop open. Let's take a look at good old Web Application 35. Okay, so what I want to show you on this is that the home view so this one doesn't have that. Go to Web Application 31 then. So the home view on this one is going to have some columns set. And the whole idea with this grid system in Bootstrap is that you have 12 columns. And then you can say, if I'm on a medium-sized display 4 columns, right? And then I could say call dash, say if I'm on a large size display, maybe I want this thing to take not 4 columns, but 3 columns, because it's wide, right? And I could say if it's on a narrow, extra small, then only show 1. Then I want this to take up, maybe I want it to take up, all 12 columns. So honestly, with these, I end up usually trial and error and taking advantage of the fact that Bootstrap, Browser Link will update as I type them. But the idea here that I want to show is that Bootstrap is an HTML5 feature in the .NET templates. Okay, so we've been looking at HTML, CSS features. So now let's shift over to JavaScript. And what I want to talk about here, first of all, is jQuery. This is funny. I made this chart about a month ago, and already the number is is lower. It's more than this. So pretty much everyone is using jQuery now. There are good reasons. It's a very popular library. And some of the reasons are, definitely easy to learn, easy to get started. It has a great selection engine. So commonly the things that were frustrating to do in JavaScript were to find something in a page and then to change it, right? You needed to go and find, an element and change the color, or you needed to go find something and hide it, or whatever. And so, the combination of DOM selection and DOM manipulation is something jQuery does very well. Oh, it's interesting, too, that over time, jQuery needed to do a lot of work to work across a lot of browsers. And over time, as browser JavaScript support has gotten better, there's less work involved for jQuery. The nice thing with that is that if you've got existing jQuery, it moves forward and the jQuery library keeps getting smaller. But for instance, a lot of the querying now is simpler because browsers support the query selector all method, and so it allows for the same kind of DOM traversing. The point here is go to jQuery.com. It has all this stuff, including help and community and extensions. So first we'll take a look at just kind of generally how jQuery works. Is this readable in the back? Do I need to zoom? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Did you say zoom in? No? Okay, good. So the idea here, this is a very simple script that I recommend you never actually use. This finds every div on your page and hides it. So the point is, this syntax here is the same kind of syntax you would use for CSS. So you can say, I want just a tag, but if I put a dot at the beginning, it will find every class. Or if I put a hash at the beginning, it will find every ID. So that is kind of a very simple thing there. Here's slightly more advanced. This will find everything with a class of submit, and it'll wire up a click function that says, that shows an alert. So the important point here is that this is not just finding one item. This is finding the dot submit will find multiple events and wire them all up. So that's very helpful. Here, taking that, let me see. Like the same slide. Let's move on. Here's something that I really like about jQuery is it makes it easy to chain things. So I can say, okay, wire up a submit when the click event happens, set the CSS for the submit item. So we're changing the color to indicate something's happening, and then we're finding a container and we're adding something to it, and we're wiring up a click event to that. So the idea is that you can very quickly kind of nest and build things that way. So let's take a real quick look at, I would ask, but I don't think you'll actually tell me. Is anyone completely new to jQuery? It'd be great if one person put their hand up. Yeah? Okay. A few people. Good. So let's do that. So here's something I want to show real quick. It's called JSBin. So I've got an example one here. There. So there are a lot of great sites out there for as you're developing. I think that Visual Studio is I told you Visual Studio has great support for everything. Sometimes you just want to click away in a browser, and that's fine. So JSBin is nice. Another one I really like lately is called CodePen. CodePen.io. That's more advanced, but it's a browser editor thing, and you can go in and you can add in HTML, CSS, JavaScript. A nice thing that these things allow you to do is share them with someone else. So you can say, okay, here's, hey, check out this neat thing I built, or hey, I just wrote this, and why isn't it working, right? So I'm going to close this one down. Here is my JSBin. And so here I've got an element with an ID of monkey. And I've got some jQuery that I've written. So I've said, when the item loads, then, when the page loads, we find the item, we first fade it out, then we fade it back in, then we add, it's just a div, we add to the div an unordered list, we add an item to the unordered list, and then we hook up a click event, and for that click event, we do a few more things. We hide it, we change the color, we fade it back in, or we fade it in, okay? So now, on this page, if I click this Run with JS, right, so that actually executes it. So that fades in, and now here's the click event, fade it in. So this is a very simple way. If you're new to jQuery, I recommend kind of this approach of just playing with it. And of course, there's a lot more examples and things. There's also one really nice thing is that we've got great IntelliSense support in Visual Studio for jQuery. So you can type things and we'll autocomplete things for you there. So for instance, let's go to a script. So actually, I'll just do one in the page. Create a script tag. Okay, so if I said, $, parentheses, right? So it's giving me the IntelliSense there, and I could say, header, or let's go footer. And I can start saying, add class, right? And it knows, okay, look, you need a class for string name. So this is another great example, and this has all the overrides and everything for you. So that, I believe, is our quick look at jQuery. This is one of those things, where it's, I think most people now are pretty familiar with it, but it's a pretty core fundamental thing and worth thinking about. Now we're going to shift over and look at single-page applications. So the idea is that we've had, the traditional web page is something where you've got, you've got your server, you've got your page, and you are used to kind of interacting like this. So here's my browser, here's my server, and I want something. So I request, I send a URL, the server packages up HTML, CSS, images, and JavaScript, and sends them back to me. And then I want to do something else. I click something else on the page. And the server does all of that all over again, right? So this is fine for a lot of sites if this is pretty different from this, right? But a lot of the time, that's not the case. As you're working through a site, a lot of the time, there's not much difference, and we're sending over the same images, HTML, CSS, JavaScript. Now, we can fix some of that by caching, by doing some intelligent things, setting the cache headers and using content delivery networks. But in some cases, let's say that this is an application, and we're doing the same things over and over again. The first request to a single-page application, it still needs to send HTML, CSS, JavaScript, usually more for a single-page application, more JavaScript. But the second time, I request a new product, and all it sends back is a tiny bit of data. It's just sending me back some JSON data, right? I make a JavaScript request, and it sends back just the data. So this allows me to move quickly through the site. It's nice on a desktop for applications. You may be familiar, Outlook Web, Gmail, any of the maps, any of the online mapping products, etc., right? But it's great for a phone or a mobile device where you have less bandwidth because it's very responsive. You're not, retrieving the entire page over and over. So let's take a look at some common frameworks. So one that's been pretty popular is Knockout.js. And Knockout is really kind of focused on this binding thing. So it'll do two-way binding. And what that allows you to do Traditionally, if you write your own single-page application without any library, and I don't recommend you do that anymore. I recommend using a library. But if you did, you make a request to the server, you get back some data, now what? Now you go through and maybe use a bunch of jQuery and update things and hook everything up. And then, you know, when I do something on the page, now I need to pack all the data from the form elements back into some JavaScript object and send it back to the server. So there's a lot of goo, you know, there's a lot of plugging things together. And instead, Knockout is you know, pretty focused on this binding thing. So I can say, here's my data, here's my elements on the page, and then I put in attributes in my HTML, and the attributes map the data to the form elements or to the page elements. And so when I update one, the other updates. There's support for other things in Knockout, such as, you know, validation and other things. But really, I think one of the things people like a lot about Knockout is just this kind of quick, lightweight binding. Another one that's gotten extremely popular lately is AngularJS. And AngularJS is, I didn't like it at first, I'll be honest. It really kind of takes things over. It kind of re-implements the DOM, the document object model. It has its own custom tags, and it also extends your tags. And so when you're using something like, when you're using Angular, you really shouldn't be doing DOM manipulation anymore. You should work through Angular to handle all of that. But once you get used to that, it's extremely powerful, and it's actually kind of lightweight. You look at this HTML, and there's not any logic in there. There's just tags that are declarative. So here I'm able to say something like, you know, ng repeat, and I'm saying just iterate through, and it'll output things, right? I also have this ng pluralize, and so that's an example of a directive. And directives are extremely powerful and a little bit intimidating to start with, but they allow you to redefine pretty much anything. So any tag, you can say, this is how I want this to behave. All right? We'll look at an example of this in a second. But a key thing to see here is declarative and strict separation. You're not going to see, you know, script intermingled with Angular. They're very kind of separate. This forces you to move your code into controllers and into directives and services, and so it's really kind of, it's really an MVC framework in your browser. And then finally, we'll look at one more, which is Ember.js. We have an example of Ember.js as well. Some interesting things about Ember.js, and I actually had the opportunity to talk to lead developer Tom Dale at a conference, and these were the things he told me were important. Is, you know, it really is, it's a full framework similar to Angular. They really focus on convention over configuration, so there's a little bit less, you know, focusing on all these kind of services, and you know, by default you may have less code in an Ember app until you want to extend and change things. Also, URLs are extremely important. So by default, it's going to be handling all the URLs, and it really kind of focuses on, you know, as you navigate through a single-page application, what happens to your URL? And in a lot of cases, nothing, right? So I'm clicking through, and JavaScript is requesting stuff from the server, and that's sending data back to me, and I've navigated through a product list, and I'm halfway through ordering, and now, or you know, I found something I want to share with a friend, so I copy the URL and send it to them, and they get the front page of the website, right? And so Ember really focuses on maintaining really good URLs that capture the entire application state. So let's look at two demos here. So first I'm going to start with an Ember application. And this is the Geek Quiz website. This is something that we did for Build last year. And so in this application, actually I'll just run it first. let's run. The idea with this application is I go through and answer questions. I take a quiz. So first I'll register, because I don't remember my... Okay. So it's creating an account for me, and now it's loading these questions. So this page loads up, and when I answer a question, does anyone know the answer? Okay. So when I clicked that answer, I clicked the button, it sent the answer back to the server, and then the server graded me. It said yes or no. Sends that answer back to me in the browser. Now when I click next question, it's going to go back to the server and get my next question. And it's per user, so I don't see the same question over and over. These aren't in random, they're actually in an order. And so when I click next question, it says, okay, this is the user ID, he's on this question, get him the next one. And when it sends back the question, what information is it sending me? It's actually 5 things here, right? The question and the 4 answers. And so now I can go through, right? So just taking a quiz. So now let's look at how this works on the back end. So we're actually using ASP.NET Web API on the server to handle the services. And that's an important point that we'll look at after lunch. But the idea is my first request to the server, I get HTML, CSS, JavaScript, images, etc. That works really well for ASP.NET MVC. That's kind of a good thing. It's great for handling HTML and forms and all that stuff. But when I'm doing these lightweight HTTP interactions, JavaScript is calling and getting back JSON. ASP.NET, you can do that with ASP.NET MVC, but ASP.NET Web API is even simpler. So again, we'll see that after lunch when we look at that. But what I do want to show is the front end. Okay, so here is this application. This is using Ember. And first of all, I'll show you the script, and then we'll look at the actual kind of binding to it. So it's going to create an Ember application. It is going to set up a controller. It's going to do some initialization. Here are the key things I want to show. There are 2 functions here, next question and send answer. Okay? So next question is going to call, in jQuery, it's going to call back to the server. It's going to call to this API, and it's going to say, get me some JSON. JavaScript object notation. So it's package up this data in JavaScript object notation. Then it uses that data and it sets the properties. And then we also set up a fail. So if something goes wrong, then we set the title to something went wrong. Okay? So that's actually relatively simple there. Then there's also a send answer, which is what's going to happen when we click the button. Let's forget about that for a second. Let's just look at what happens for next question. Okay? So if I go up here, when we've got this next question, then we're ready to set the data. First of all, I want to show this top line here. It says script, and it says text handlebars. And so the type there is handlebars. That's actually a templating system. And what handlebars looks like is this. So any of these where you see double braces at the beginning and ending, those are bindings. So there we can say, okay, first we need to set a question somewhere, and then we also need to set all the answers. Okay, so let me see. So first, okay, so there's where we set the answer for one that's been answered. So ignore that. Here's where we set the question. So we said, give us a question. We got it back. The question has a title, and we set that here. Then we also get back a list of possible answers. So here we're using a for each. And we're iterating over that. And we're saying for each of those options, create a button. And then here's a key thing here. We're setting an action for that button. So we're saying, wire up the button to the send answer function. So I'm going through this kind of fast, but the idea is call the server, get back a question that has some answers, display the question here, and then iterate through all the possible answers and show buttons for them. When I click that button, I want to call send answer. So here's that. And all we have to do, the send answer is being passed a question and an option. And so I, first of all, disable the button so that we don't click on it more than once. And then we post it to the server. And then we do two things once we get a response back. So we call post, and then we have a callback function here. And the callback says, first of all, show the person whether or not it's right or wrong, and then set the question to answered. So that's, moved through relatively quick. If you'd like to see this in more detail, we actually have this, there's a WebCamp training kit that has these demos available and also hands-on labs. And so if we go to, I just type in ak.ms webcamps training kit, that's going to actually download and install it. Or you can search on Microsoft Download. So if we go download Microsoft. So if I search for a WebCamp training kit on the Microsoft Download site, here it is. So this includes slides, the demonstrations, and then also it includes the hands-on labs for more detail. Okay, so that was Ember. Let's take a look at an Angular application. The reason I'm showing you both is because, really, the idea with these single-page applications, it's good to try a few and just find which one feels more natural to you. We are seeing that Angular seems to be kind of more popular lately, and so the ASP.NET team is investing a little bit more in Angular in the future. And partly that's because the way that Angular works, by kind of completely rebuilding the DOM and using these kind of this declarative syntax, we can do more for you. So Ember is and Knockout are kind of built more around you write HTML and you write these expressions. It's kind of more code focused. Angular is a little bit more, you're building these kind of custom controls and with directives behind them. So we can do more for you in Visual Studio in the future probably with that. So let's take a look at that application. And I told you before, I'm running a nightly build of Web Essentials, and it conflicts with this. This is one of the very few times where I'm finding conflicts here. So I'm going to restart this. So I've turned off Web Essentials. The nice thing with any of these extensions is turning them on and off. Very simple. You don't have to uninstall them. You just disable them, and they go away. Right? So here's this application called ClipMeme. And we actually, this was from build this year. It was 2 months ago. So in this demonstration, there's a site where we show animated GIFs, and then we allow you to create your own and type text over them. So I don't know if I have any animated GIFs somewhere. I bet I do. If I go into Pictures, GIF, excellent. Okay, so let's take drag and drop that in. Did it go? Good. There it is. And we'll say, dancing. Okay, and this actually is overlaying that text underneath, right? So if I said, right? So that's kind of fun. I'll be honest. When we were coming up with the different kind of demo ideas for build, and people are saying, well, let's do a business tracking site, let's do it. And I said, I just want to do a fun site. And so I just kept, saw if I could get away with it, and that's what we did. So this is a site. Then when I click submit, this actually goes and overlays that text, and it puts it into the animated GIF, right? It writes it to each frame. So that's kind of the example here. So I wanted to explain what the site does, and of course, as you mouse over them, then it actually plays them, right? So that's kind of fun. So let's take a look at how that's actually working. So if we go in here, some things I want to point out is one, again, we have these views. You'll notice this view looks different than Ember. So for instance, yeah, sorry. So there's actually not very much here, right? This is a very, lightweight view. And the reason we're able to do that is because almost all of the data is stored behind the scenes. You will notice things like here we've got this data-gm image freeze. So that is a directive we wrote. You notice how those animated GIFs only played when I hovered over them? That's because I created a directive using JavaScript that freezes the images. We also have this ng app. So if I search for that, ng-app. And so that's not the one. Well, never mind. There it is. Hooray. It was in my layout, right? So this is important. And the idea is that your app, everything that's inside the ng-app tag is handled by Angular. Everything outside of that, you can do whatever you want. You can use jQuery. You can go to town. But inside ng-app, you really are kind of you're working under Angular. Now, I did mention jQuery, and Angular does play well with jQuery. You just have to be careful about manipulating the DOM. Angular includes something they call JQ Lite, which is a streamlined version of jQuery. But if you have jQuery installed and you start using jQuery, then Angular will work smoothly with that. The point is that if we look at my HTML, here's my view, you're not going to see inline code. You're not going to see a lot of front-end manipulation here. All right. So here, we see things like we had an ng-app. We're also going to see a controller. So here we have ng-controller. Okay. So this, for some reason, I like to do the drawing on the screen, but it doesn't like me. There it is. Right? So our body tag is both the app and the controller. And then it's going to handle everything that's inside that. So now let's take a look at that back-end code. And so what's kind of, what we do a lot of the time, you start getting a lot of scripts in an application. So it's good to split them into a vendor and an app directory. So here I've got everything that I've written for my app here. We've got controllers, directors, and services. And so I'm just going to briefly overview these and then send you off to lunch. The idea that you'll see with Angular is it's built on dependency injection. So you'll declare the things that you want, and then it will automatically pull them in. Frequently, if you get something wrong, if you mess up your dependency injection, if you leave off ng-app, ng-controller, good luck. Like, the page just won't work. Right? And we actually have tooling built in so that if you leave off ng-app and put in ng-controller, it'll give you the green squiggles, and it'll say you need to declare ng-app. So that's something Visual Studio will do for you. And then also there's support for, I believe, I can say scope dot apply, broadcast, emit, etc. So this is an example. This, as I mentioned, Angular is really a pretty full framework, and it's nice that it's got pretty good IntelliSense here to kind of guide me through, right? So this is going to tell me everything that I could do here. So that's my controller, and I'm not going to walk through what, how exactly it's working. I will. Actually, this one isn't doing a whole lot. One thing that was kind of fun, I mentioned that image freeze, right? So here we're finding the window and then setting things up. There's quite a bit to Angular, honestly. I'm still learning it. I've spent a lot of time this year ramping up on it, and there's a lot more to know. There are some good resources out there. I did a presentation at Build where it was myself and an experienced Angular developer, and we were kind of comparing notes. I was building the ASP.NET backend, and he was building the Angular front end. So I recommend that. And I do recommend trying out some of these different frameworks and seeing just, which is kind of more natural for you. And so let's wrap up so you can eat. So first of all, we covered a lot in the last hour. We talked about modern web standards, HTML5, JavaScript, and CSS. We talked about some different single-page application frameworks, and then we looked at two examples, actually. The Geek Quiz front end was Ember, and the Clip Meme site was Angular. And lunch. Thank you.